Sarah Fox with the Bookish Fox, and today I'm interviewing the best copywriter on the internet, Jamie Jensen, who's at yourhotcopy.com. So, Jamie, can you tell us where you are in your business right now? Like, what are you doing with it?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd like to say thanks for calling me the best copywriter because I was like, well, that's a bold title. I appreciate that. I don't consider myself the best, but I am proud of the work that we do at Your Hot Copy, and I believe in what we do, and I think we are great at it, myself included, and as well as my team. So you asked where I am with my business and like what I'm doing with it. So right now we are moving towards an agency model. So what that means is I'm still the founder and CEO, and I often supervise and handle a lot of strategy because you actually can't have effective copy without having a solid strategy in place. Even the creative ideas for what goes into the content has to have a strategic point of view. It has to have a strategic foundation. So a lot of what I do now for the business is more strategic and big picture focused, and supervision based. And I have a team of writers under me that handle a lot of the actual content creation. And my number two, Erin, her role has shifted as well. So basically, she's been with me for it'll be 2 years in November, and now she's more of like a director of operations rather than like just another writer or a writer who does these services. Well, I do these services. So it's been interesting as like I'm building the business to figure out all the different roles and who does what and how it makes sense. But that's where we are right now. And we've got three awesome writers on our team, all of whom have entertainment industry backgrounds. So our basically what we do is everyone that works with me, because I come from the entertainment industry, has a background in comedy and entertainment and is familiar on some level with screenwriting and creative writing and all of that stuff. And then we train them to write copy. So they kind of come with the personality and the sense of humor and the like overall story foundation. And, we train them up to be able to write high converting sales copy and all the brand strategy stuff they need to know to deliver what we deliver. So that's what we're doing.
That's amazing. So, you said that you're in the entertainment industry. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Well, I I mean, I worked in Hollywood. Let's start from the beginning. So I was born in no.
It's like the time I went to Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, I my undergraduate degree is in storytelling, which I kind of made up because I went to a program where I could do that. So a lot of what I did in undergraduate was screenwriting and film oriented. So I've been writing screenplays since I'm 18. And then for graduate school, I decided that I wanted to really get to know like the film industry. I felt like I was a Hollywood writer, ever since I knew that I wanted to write screenplays. There was just something about it that even though on the inside I was like, I'm an artist and I'm so dramatic and I have all these things to say that are like really profound statements, there was this part of me that just knew that I wanted to write like popcorn movies. So Hollywood was calling me, and I went to graduate school at USC. I went to LA. I moved to LA for 3 years. I went to one of the most competitive producing programs. Actually, it's the only producing program, and one of the most competitive film graduate programs like in the country, even the world. We had a lot of international students with us as well. And basically, that program taught us, it's almost like an MBA in the entertainment industry because it teaches you all of the nuts and bolts of how Hollywood works, how the system operates. Like we had to take finance, we had to take marketing, we learned everything. We got to learn also from people who are working in the industry. So the guy who's running Fox and he's the vice president, and like the guy who used to be like head of legal for Universal Studios. So a lot of the people we were learning from were actual industry people. And then we had tons of internships, and right out of the gate, I had industry jobs. So I was working, initially in television and then in film. And ultimately, I decided that it wasn't for me. Like I didn't want to stay and sort of be on that track, and I knew I wanted to keep writing. So I ultimately left. But that, in a nutshell, is my Hollywood history.
That's amazing. I have a question for you because it's really hard for me. How do you make dialogue sound different for different people? That's always the thing I struggle with. Like all my dialogue sometimes sounds too much like me or too much like one character, and it's really hard to like do the differentials for everyone.
hmm I mean, I think, well, the first thing I'll say is like in a first draft, usually there are only going to be a couple voices that are super clear to you because that's like the main dynamic and the probably the core conflict of your entire story. Like it's the DNA of your movie, the main conflict, problem, theme, those characters are going to be expressing that and you're going to have a good handle on them, because they're either based on people or just because you've imagined them really clearly. So usually, for a first-time screenwriter, it's normal for every character to sound similar to their own personal writing voice. But I think as you go on, you'll find that like out of the gate, more of the characters will sound, really individual and you'll have a grasp on who they are. But usually it takes like, a series of drafts to like nail each character. So it's not awkward for that to be the case. Like I delivered a draft of a screenplay I was working on. I want to say it was the draft I delivered a few weeks ago, and the notes I got were like, the first draft was like, oh yeah, we like all the characters, but then this one guy, like, how can we make him quirky? How can we make him different? Like, what's interesting about him? And I was like, all right, I'm going to think about that. And then this last draft, all the characters were good, and then they had a note on one more, and it was like, we just need him to be a little more charming. Like, can you make him more charming? Can you make him more likable so we're rooting for him? I'm like, yeah, sure. So it's normal for you to have to like put filler in and then figure out who a character is later once you have all of the story mechanics working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And how do you develop the story then is my next question. Because you also included so much in your copy. I know it's like huge for how you teach people how to do it. So like how do you use story in your screenplay? And then also how do you incorporate those same principles into copywriting?
Mm-hmm. Um, this is like this is hard to answer in a short period of time.
Sorry.
My basic story definition, which you probably know already because I know you're familiar with a lot of the stuff that I do and what I talk about. I've learned so much about storytelling in the last decade of my life that like literally 20 different teachers like pop into my head every time I have to tell a story.
There's so many people.
Yeah, right. Like ultimately it always does come back to the Joseph Campbell narrative structure piece. Like it does, but when you're dealing with a screenplay, I think that there's pieces that are really amorphous, especially in the center of a story. Like I can write an act one in like probably a half an hour. Like someone could give me an act one and be like, boom, 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 act one done, yeah. And I'm like, great, what's the rest of the fucking movie? So I think because the scope of a screenplay tends to be large, I think it takes a lot of practice to just get that scope down and understand like what needs to happen at this minute of the movie and what needs to happen at this minute of the movie and understand what that is for the story that you're trying to tell. Because structure is structure, but usually you have a story you're trying to tell and like it's almost like sculpting. So like you start with like this like block of amorphous clay and you figure out how to structure that based on like what you're really trying to do with it. So you kind of keep chipping away at it until it makes sense. But the short version. So the definition of story, which you may remember and you might want to say, do you know the definition of story, Sarah?
Don't put me on the spot. It's so
not to put you on the spot.
There's so many different the problem is my English grad degree comes in and I'm like there's so many definitions and then I remember the pages from my literary definition book and it's several pages long, the whole story. I'd say it's basically you have a central conflict and characters go through it and they come back out different after having experienced it. That's the short answer.
Yeah. So my that's exactly right, and it's exactly the same thing. It's the same as my definition. It's just different words. So like my definition is a character achieving a goal in spite of obstacles, and yes, transformation is always a piece of that because we change as a result of the obstacles that we face. So to me, story equals transformation, but the actual story mechanics that you need are like a character, obstacles, and a goal. So I think one of the main things that has to happen in a screenplay that doesn't typically have to happen in a novel is the character has to have a clear goal because you can explore the inner life of the character in a novel in a way that you just can't on screen. Like you're watching them do stuff. You're not watching them think about stuff, and you're not watching them like experience things internally. So you can't really be inside what's going on and what the experience is like and how the wind blew and what the cafe smelled like and all these like really delicious details that you can have in a novel you can't have in a screenplay because all you have is like the character and what they're doing, and you as the writer have to know all of that stuff. Like you have to know what all of the things that they're feeling and what they're experiencing. You have to like internally be like, you have to almost be experiencing it as you're writing because you have to know, but none of that actually goes in the screenplay. It's this like really pared down version of storytelling in a way, that makes you get like to the essence of everything, which is probably why I love it so much. It's like that ultimate challenge to make things like as simple and as possible and like whittle them down.
That's amazing.
I'm just nerding out right now.
I love it. But how do you do that with copy then, like an about page or something like that?
Yeah, sure. So basically the way that I apply it to copy, because all copy has story as well, is that you still always have a problem being resolved. There's always a main character, which when you're handling copy, the character is generally the client, the reader, the customer, the buyer, the audience, right? So, any story that you're telling to anyone, you always have like a person in mind. In copy, you're talking directly to someone. So that's your character. That's the person that you need to have in mind, that you need to be identifying with, and you have to understand them and know them to be writing to them. That's the person who's trying to solve a problem, and that's the problem that you have to solve. So essentially, copy is still walking you through the experience of solving a problem and the result of transforming someone's life, but you're doing it in a very different format than how you would like just sit back and experience a story with a show or with a movie. That being said, the job of the copywriter is very similar to the job of the novelist or the screenwriter in that they're in control of the reader. Like it's your job to capture them and to direct what they see and what they know. So with visual storytelling, I'm not a novelist and I have no experience writing that way. Like it's not what I do. So I'll speak to visual storytelling, but one of the big notes that I would constantly get early on in film school and in screenwriting school was, you're directing their eyes. You're telling them what to look at. So even if you have a scene where you're like in a park, you're the one that's explaining, you're telling the audience, and obviously the director is going to make this happen as well. But as the visual storyteller, it's your job to tell them like what they're looking at, why it's important, and what details they're noticing. So copy's the same way. Like you could have a very broad subject, but it's your job to hone in on like the important details and paint that visually.
So how would someone do that? Like concretely paint visually? Is it just like details about a person's life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like if you're trying to identify with a client, or let's say you're writing a sales page about somebody who, wakes up every morning stressed out and like has this problem with, they're always stressed out all the time. And like they wake up every day like, I have to get somewhere. I have to go to work and it's late. I use my alarm too many times. Right, let's just say that like, okay, this is your ideal client and you're selling like a new kind of alarm clock or a product that helps them fix the problem of having a stressed out morning every morning, because it starts their day on the wrong foot and then they have a bad day. And like you essentially get into, hey, you know what would fix your entire life, because every day sucks because you have a shitty morning, is this alarm clock that's going to wake you up to the sound of twinkling stars. Really making this up. The way that you visually identify with them is by like talking about the details of their morning in an as visual a way as possible. So like when you're describing their problem and making sure that they understand like that you get them and you see them and you know the problem they're struggling with, you have to pick out details and like, I like to make everything super concise, but I still think that there's always room to paint the picture. Mm-hmm. So it could be like, you try to drink coffee, but then spill the burning hot cup of coffee on your shirt, and then then you're on your way to work looking like an idiot because you have coffee on your shirt and you didn't even have time to change. I'm literally just throwing this out. It would probably sound better if I was writing it.
That's how I feel about my life all the time. I'm like, I would sound so much better right now if this was just written down.
But essentially, essentially that's the idea. The idea is that like you're extrapolating these like meaningful details that, those are the moments in the person's day that make them like go, ugh, if only things were different. If only I had another way of doing this. If only my alarm clock didn't make me want to punch a wall. Like, I don't know.
That's amazing. Yeah, basically it's showing, not telling.
Yep. Yep.
I have a question about titles for you.
Okay.
Naming things. They're the hardest thing on the planet for me. I'm currently trying to name a Facebook group. I'm sitting there. I've been like crowdsourcing it. I've been doing the thesaurus, and it's driving me nuts. How do you name things? Do you have tips for people? Also, some of my clients come and are like, how do you name things? I'm like, that's probably the weakest point for me.
Mm-hmm. I wish I had more of a structured system for this. I really don't. It's a combination of things. I think that when it comes to naming and when it comes to like creativity, it's alchemy. You know what I mean? It's this like you need the right combination of things and then you just need to keep trying. But specifically with naming, like there are some foundational things that I start with. So the big piece is always like you have to think about the transformation, the result that the person wants, like your ideal client or the people in your community or the audience you're reaching. Like, what do they want? Because ultimately, that's who you're serving, and that's what copy is ultimately about. It's about like, what do they desire, what do they want, and how does what you do deliver that for them? So, with that said, that's always the first step. Is like, what is the result? What actually is it? Like, is it an 8-week program? Is it a business? If it's a business, what type of business is it? Is it products? Is it services? Like, what are the products? Like, what is the product? Is it a book? Is it a, whatever? You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. What actually is it? And then I always have like all the synonyms for the actual thing that it is. I make a list, like, here are all these different words. I don't actually make a list. I'm like listing it in my head. But if somebody wanted to get really organized about it, you'd get like a list of the, like, what do they want? What do the people want? A list of what are all the synonyms for what this actually is? And then, and I also always recommend, and I recommend this for writing also, but especially for naming, like, you have to do it in a group. You have to have a partner or have a mastermind group or have people that you talk to, preferably ones who are creative and have good ideas too, that are like more than happy to contribute. And, you guys help each other out with this stuff. But I think that naming is exceptionally hard to do by yourself. Usually, like with my business, often I don't usually have an idea that doesn't come with a name. Like for me, whenever I have an idea for something, almost always it's like the name comes. And then I realize, and then I know it's like all comes together in one package in my brain where I'm like, oh my God, I want to do this. And oh my
God. That's amazing. I wish I had that, Jamie. I wish I had that.
But I do have to name other people's stuff too. And I have had to name like other random things that like weren't major ideas for my business or major things for me, but and then sometimes it's just a matter of like not taking it that seriously also, which is a big thing. I have a Facebook group called the Champagne Room, and I don't even know if that's like I don't even think it's a good name anymore, but you know what? I went with it and I'm sticking with it. And
that's awesome.
I support it and it it does make sense for my business and for like me. But at the same time, I'm like, it doesn't really tell people like literally anything about what it is or what it's for. So then I just have to have a tagline that explains it better, because if your name doesn't do the job, then your tagline has to pick up the slack. It's basically the rule of names and tags. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And also, I'm curious, I've been wanting to know your thoughts on this. There's like this endless debate, at least in the writing communities. Do you find your voice? Is there even something called a voice? Mm-hmm. Is it something you acquire? Because people ask me all the time, you have a great voice. How did you find it? I'm like, I was born that way. I mean, with time it develops, but it seems like this mythical thing out there.
There are a few different answers to this question. Because I think that ultimately knowing your voice is like knowing who you are as a writer and knowing what's marketable about you, like ultimately, because for me, that was the lens that I had to wear as a screenwriter. Like for me to write screenplays that people picked up and read, and from the first few pages, they knew like this was the tone of the movie. This was the kind of movie you were in. This was the pace. This was like if you were going to get jokes, this was how fast they were coming. It's there is a distinct sense of personality and a distinct sense of like, you know, tone of voice that comes, with each business or a blog or, or a public figure or celebrity or TV show or writer or whatever. Like I think that everyone does bring their own unique brand of how they sound and what they do and what their point of view is, and the voice really is a blend of all that. But I do think that people like they struggle with figuring out their writing voice. A lot of that has to do with like that they haven't been trying to figure it out for a long, like, they haven't been working on their writing for long enough to find it. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of it is just like, it's that disconnect of you're not comfortable enough with your writing to like write how you sound or to feel clear on who you are or to feel like it's good enough. I think a lot of people also like overjudge what their voice is and think like, oh, well, this can't be it because it doesn't sound like this person. It's like, well, actually, maybe that's just how you sound. So like, maybe you sound awesome in your own way, but you're judging it because you're comparing it to all these other people who, you think have different voices or better voices or whatever, which also isn't helpful. So I do think that there is an opinion that like you have to find your voice, and until you find it, it's not there. I think it's always there. It's just a matter of getting comfortable on the page and having clarity on it for yourself. Like, so like I didn't know I was funny, by the way, until I started writing screenplays when I was 18. I like thought I was like so artsy and melodramatic, and because like I'm kind of a dramatic person in real life. I'm like kind of a dramatic person. But when I talk about the things that I like are very dramatic to me, it's funny. And other people think it's funny because I'm just being truthful. But I had literally no idea I was funny until I wrote a scene, brought it into a screenwriting class. The whole class read it. People laughed. And I was like, oh, I'm not writing a drama.
So you meant it completely sincerely?
Like, I was just writing truth. I was like, literally like, this is what happens in my life. Like, this is what happens in my family. My family's weird, and this is what happens. And like, I want to write about it. And like, I'm writing my truth. And it was just funny. I don't think that I like thought about it that much. I wasn't like, I just think that the subject matter I was writing about seemed really serious to me. So because of that, I didn't think that writing about it would ever be funny, but the way that I did it was funny, and I didn't even know. And I think for me, I think that that's what finding your voice is. It's like, it's a lot of it is like putting yourself out there and like having other people mirror back to you like who you are and like what your writing is. I think having a manager for screenwriting made a big difference for me, just because I don't think that I had the confidence of knowing that I was clear on my voice either until I had that professional relationship with somebody who was constantly helping me develop my work and like looking at it and stuff like that. So, for me, that's what helped. So, when I started copywriting, I felt clear on my voice, but really what it comes down to is just being comfortable on the page with who you are and knowing what that is, like knowing that your point of view is funny, or knowing that your point of view is inspirational, or knowing, what is your point of view and the way that you see things and the way that you communicate them do for people. I never tried to be funny. I'm not always funny all the time. It's just as a writer, I happen to be a comedy writer, and it happens to make people laugh. And I just naturally think that way. So then it just snowballed from there.
That's amazing. Because you're so funny to me, Jamie. It's like, I can't imagine you not being funny.
And I think a lot of that for me has to do with honesty. Like, it's like, to me, I'm like, I'm just being honest. Like, I'm just talking about how much writing sucks sometimes. And to other writers, they're like, oh my God, that's so funny. And I'm like, cause you do it too. Like, you totally get what I'm talking about. Totally ate 5 muffins instead of wrote that scene you were supposed to write today. Like, so did I. It's okay.
We've all been there.
We've all been there. Yeah. And so the other thing that I want to say about voice is that, yes, ultimately about being comfortable on the page and like knowing who you are and like, how other people receive that, and getting that feedback is extremely important. You can't do it in a room by yourself. You have to do it with a community, and you have to do the work of actually doing the writing and like, you know, creating the content or creating whatever you're creating and putting it out there. People will know. You'll get to know yourself. The other thing is like there is a big stress on like your one voice, like you have one. And that bothers me mostly because yeah, who I am and my personality is pretty much always the same, but I also adapt. And most people do, most people adapt to their environment, to who they're talking to. You know, you also have personalities of other people in your life that like because they've been friends with you or because they're in your family, like you just kind of they're part of you in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the stuff that you pull from as a screenwriter, like when you're creating characters. And it's also what you pull from when you're writing copy, because you have to picture who you're talking to and you have to adapt because you're speaking to them. So a lot of voice is there's flexibility there, and there's different versions of yourself that's still you, but like it's you being, adaptable and resourceful, and it's a communication strategy. So I think, it's okay if you don't feel like your blog sounds the same every time you fucking write it, because like it might not. Like you might be in an angry mood one day and write a blog like passionately write an angry rant blog, and like every other blog is like life is wonderful and I'm so inspired, and like it's all good. It's all good.
It's true. Like you talk completely differently to your parents than like your boyfriend.
Yeah. Yeah.
People don't think about it, but it's like you go and have voices so easily every day, or you pick up other people's like idioms. It's amazing. Like one of my best friends, I keep saying certain phrases. I'm like, I never said that until I started hanging out with you all the time.
Oh my gosh. I don't even remember what it was that my boyfriend says all the time that I started saying recently. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm talking like him. So annoying.
What's really annoying is when you start writing in the style of whatever you're reading. Like I was reading Jane Austen, and then it's like I'm writing a YA contemporary book, and then my characters start using really old school phrases. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Mm-hmm. Whoa, whoa. Do not do this, Sarah. Read something else, take a break. So I try to write in the mornings before my brain's been polluted with other writing.
Mm-hmm. It's hard. That actually is one of the hardest things, is like is knowing, like is having that internal compass. Like it's good that for example, you can recognize that when you're being really heavily inspired by another writer, or you kind of take them on, and you're like in that world, so you're playing to it, and it's like fun, but it's not really the voice you want to be writing in. It's not really Sarah's voice. And it's good that you know that. I think it's fun to try on other writers' voices, though, sometimes. I think not necessarily for your business or for your own work, but for things like journaling, it can be really cool to just, like, play with it. It's like putting on a costume, right? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting exercise. But, yeah, that's a thing.
I think it does also increase your toolbox, is the way I'd put it, for your writing. Like, if I read Hemingway, then it gives me the ability to write more sparse, shorter, more like concise sentences, which is good sometimes. You don't want it all the time, but it's gooder than if I read someone like a poet or something, or Fitzgerald, where it's more flowery, then I get more metaphor. So it's good, I think, to try to write in different styles, and it expands your sentence structure, your vocabulary, what options are available to you. So I'm a big fan of trying it, but not when it will bleed over too much.
Yeah. One of the things that I recommend to people is to have other writers that sound a lot like them, and to identify like music that they connect with that feels like on tone to it. But also, when I do brand slams with people, I deliver to them like, here are other writers like that I know that sound like you, or that I've researched that sound like you. Because when people are kind of in that space of searching, or if your brain's been polluted, what helps is to just kind of like, okay, let me just read one page from this other person who I know is very aligned to the way that I write. Because it like brings you back to your own space and your own voice. So you're not writing like Jane Austen, but you're writing like this other awesome blogger who just happens to have the exact same, like the exact same lyricism to his writing that you do, or whatever. You know what I mean?
That's awesome. That's a good point. That's amazing. How do you have time for screenwriting on top of all that you do? So you do these classes, you do like all these interviews, you do this business. I was thinking, I'm like, I struggle to have time. Like I write every day, I make time for it, but it's hard. Like the business will want to take over. So I'm like, how does Jamie write all these screenplays on top of like her fitness classes and everything
My
else she
God, I know.
does?
That's a good question. I was talking to my therapist about this today. Um, it's too much. I would not tell anyone to do the amount of things that I'm currently doing in life. It's like way too much. Um, However, this year I haven't actually worked on like my own screenplay, my own stuff. I have been working on a screenplay that I was hired to write, but I have not actually worked on a screenplay that was just for me. The last time I touched it was end of last year. So in 2016, I have not actually worked on my own stuff. Um,
Wow.
and I actually, believe it or not, have had a few days of downtime where if I chose to, I could have picked it up and worked on it, but I chose to just have downtime.
Hey, sometimes you need to.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's all doable. It's really ultimately about choices and what you want. Like, I don't think that it's easy, but I don't think that writing is ever easy. I don't think that writing is easy. Like, I could have a month off and writing wouldn't be easy. It would suck because writing just is hard. It's really
It's
hard. It's
hard.
especially hard when you're rewriting.
Oh, I
Um,
hate rewriting so much. I'll do it, but it's like my least favorite part of the whole process.
it's really the worst. And with screenwriting, that's most of the job.
Same with novels. So much of it's just rewriting. It's so painful.
hmm So, yeah, that's my answer to that question. Is I think it's all doable. It depends on like what you really want, what your goals are. You know, I think that holding yourself accountable to getting your own work, to getting a screenplay done, period. Like screenplay that I'm getting paid for is hard. Screenplay that I'm not getting paid for, it's like, and it's emotionally vulnerable. It's like resistance times 1,000. Like,
It's so true. The more emotionally close you are to something, the harder it is to write.
like the first draft comes out in a fit. It's like, oh no. And you're like, oh great, now I have to actually make this blob of content an actual screenplay that like makes sense and like resolves and isn't like corny and doesn't like dodge feelings. Fine. Or I'll just put it off for 8 months.
That's amazing. That's amazing. But how can people find you then, Jamie, if they want to talk to you more about copywriting or hire you or just say hello?
So I'm at yourhotcopy.com. If they want to just say hello, they can email me at jamie@yourhotcopy.com and just say hi. Um, and yeah, that's where we hang out. You can learn all about all of our different copywriting services there. If you ever want to chat, screenwriting stuff, they can just shoot me an email. That's pretty much everything. We do all kinds of copy stuff at Hot Copy. We do website copy. We do internet marketing stuff. I also have some courses that are available once in a while.
It's amazing. I love your courses. I would recommend everyone take them because it was amazing.
Thank you.
I loved it. I loved it so much. Thank you so much for meeting with me, Jamie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And no problem.